welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. For our last session of today, I'm joined here with Jens Groth, who is the chief scientist at Nexus. So we'll be going into all the details about the history of ZK, where we came from, where we are at now, and what Nexus's current focus is. So thank you so much, Jens, for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if we can first start off just with a discussion about the evolution of ZK. So you've been quite a pioneer in the ZK space, especially with the pairing-based non-interactive snarks and what we now know, like what many projects now use, which is Groth 16. But curious to hear just how you see ZK evolving all over the years. Were there any sort of challenges that maybe were really prevalent 10 years ago that have been solved now, or now that ZK adoption has been increasing a bit, any kinds of new challenges that we can foresee? Just curious to hear about how you've seen the space evolve over the years.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been an amazing development of zero-knowledge proofs. And I feel like people nowadays that do research, they lost a lot of the history of the field. And, you know, I felt the same way when I started, because I started in 2000s, right? And I had also lost a lot of the knowledge in the field. So if we go back all the way back to the 80s, I feel that there was already there a lot of discovery going on. You saw, like, you invented zero-knowledge proofs, but people also very quickly picked up on it and explored, like, the fundamental concepts. You know, how do you define, which kind of security properties should it have, you know, non-interactive, and so, like, how many rounds of interaction, non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs were invented back in that day. You showed that you can prove statements in any NP language and so forth. So, like, so it's very general concept. So already then I thought there was a lot of, like, discovery of the core fundamental properties from a theory perspective, right? So it wasn't practical. And then I think in the 90s and the 2000s, you had, like, so, like, that was maybe the age of hand-engineered protocols, right? You do sort of, like, specific things, like, so you had Schnorr protocols were invented in that day. You had also designated proofs, verified proofs, which is sort of like a core part of Kramer-Shoup encryption, was also invented at that time, right? So some really cool techniques, but, like, you know, always something, you know, somebody had to sit down and do the work. And the first thing I did, I was working on electronic voting, and I was like, back in the day, you know, you had to prove that you had encrypted a valid candidate, but not disclose which candidate it was, right? And it would take, like, a couple of minutes in a browser to do that. And, you know, I was then trying to work on that, and we brought it down to a second or something like that. But that was really the game, right? And nowadays, of course, you would just do that right away, right? And just do it with a CKVM, because why bother with, you know, that complexity? So there's a lot of, like, development that has happened, and I think people may not be aware of that rich history of what came in the past. And let's see, yeah, and then I think there were really some fundamental shifts that's happened, so, like, when we transitioned into 2010. So some highlights. I mean, GKR is, like, a technique we all love today, right? That was 2008, so amazing piece of work. I'm personally very proud of discovering the use of pairing-based cryptography for non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs, so that was 2006. And so, like, tying it back to what were the challenges before, right? So I had previously thought a lot about a technical problem, which was previous construction for non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs, okay? Could you, if you have a proof for a statement, can you then tweak it into another proof for a related statement, right? So does it have some sort of homomorphic and malleability properties? And nobody knew how to do that, and the techniques back then didn't seem to really be amenable to that. I thought a lot about it. And when I discovered pairing-based non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs, it actually worked out. They have re-randomization properties and just came by accident, right? Because now there was a new technique. We used pairings to construct zero-knowledge proofs. Yeah. And then, let's see, guess the work I'm most proud of is my 2010 paper, which was sort of like the first pairing-based snark, right? So then we went into the snark world, and then I mean after that it sort of like started becoming more realistic to do engineering. So now you have CKVM. So the first was like Pinocchio that said, look, let's take a C program and start proving things about C programs. And then in 2013 there was TinyRAM, and people started proving CKVMs and so forth, right? And then, I mean, all the applications. I mean, kudos to Zcash, right, for coming up with the idea of using ZK in the blockchain space for cryptocurrencies. I thought that was amazing. I mean, I had tried so many times before to talk to people in industry and so forth. They were like, yeah, that's an interesting concept, but so what, right? so also just finding the applications is something that's really exciting that we're doing that now.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different stages that we're seeing. You mentioned like the development of these different protocols over the years, and then even for the engineering side, how in the 90s we were seeing a lot of the hand engineering, and now with the development of ZKVMs, we've kind of abstracted away from those lower level circuits to something that's a little bit more accessible for developers. And even on the application side, you mentioned, like for example, Zcash was one of the first pioneers of the application space where we could actually use ZK for some of our everyday uses. So there's a few different stages we can consider, and it's really great that you mentioned them. I'm also curious to hear if you have any kinds of predictions, or if you've seen any sort of trends where we're seeing ZK going towards. Or on the other hand, I'm curious to hear, since you're involved on both the academia side and on the industry side with Nexus, do you see any sort of disconnect between, say, what's advocated for in academia versus what's actually being implemented in the industry right now? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts in those areas.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. So my sorry about that. Should I repeat the answer for the first question as well? So I was a professor before I sort of like took the leap into industry. So I've seen that side and know it very well. And I think there's a lot of overlap, right? So you do see people who are in academia who also engage with engineers and start companies and so forth. So I think I would say there's mostly a lot of overlap, and I think researchers in industry nowadays in blockchain, they're really bright and have a lot of good ideas, and also very aware of the work that's done in academia. So I wouldn't say, I don't see a disconnect on the people side. I do see maybe a disconnect on sort of like the interests that people have. So there's a lot of like very theoretical work that also happens in academia, which, if you have to ship a product and do something that people will use, right? Then this is not the kind of work that you worry about. And I would say there's, one risk of academia is that you create these bubbles. It's sort of like a social circle of like, you start publishing in the area, somebody gets traction, then somebody else publishes a paper, and suddenly you have like, fabric. And, I mean, people are very reasonable. They do want to do a good job, right? But that's sort of like a risk, and you sometimes see that in academic research, right? So I do think, sometimes you see areas popping up that might actually never see sort of like practical use. So that's a risk. On the flip side, you can say there are also themes you can pick up if you're an academic, which are hard to pick up if you're in industry, right? So sort of like thinking about the foundations of zero knowledge proofs and security and so forth. So a bit of mix of both, right? Just because the incentives are different in those two communities.
Absolutely. So like different communities, those two different communities have kind of different incentives, different priorities, and so you kind of see a mix in both communities. Got it. And wanted to also transition this conversation to focusing more about Nexus itself. So curious to hear what led you to join Nexus in the first place, and how you see Nexus really uniquely positioning itself in the ZK space.
Yeah, so Nexus sort of like came to life with a vision of doing verifiable computation at internet scale, and that was just something that really resonated with me, right? I mean, I've spent my entire career working on zero knowledge proofs, right? And you have to sort of like motivate why did you do all that kind of work, and what is sort of like the end goal for society, right? So I love that vision. And since then, Nexus has sort of like specialized and say, okay, what is the first target that we're going to have, and we're sort of like focusing now on verifiable finance, right? So we build CKVM, we build a compute network that can sort of like parallelize and make that efficient. We're building an L1 for doing financial transactions, and we've just released an alpha version of a DEX, right? So we're trying essentially to make every transaction verifiable.
Got it. And on the L1 side, so Nexus offers the ZKVM and then also its own L1. And I know for some of the recent research that's been going on in the Nexus team, you're looking at some of the economic security considerations, especially within proof-of-stake blockchains. So curious to hear about any kinds of current strategies for, say, mitigating, for example, potential forking attacks that can happen on these blockchains, especially because a lot of blockchains nowadays are open source. So wanted to hear more about some of the research that you've been doing relating to that.
Yeah, right. So yeah, throughout my career, I've been sort of like saying, yeah, verifiability is fantastic. And I've come to a realization that that's not everything. You need something more to really get in a system that is reliable throughout. And one of those things is, so I guess you can ask the question, what is it that verifiability doesn't cover? Okay? So it wouldn't cover something like confidentiality, for instance, right? Because that's like proving a negative that I did not leak some secret, right? And it doesn't really cover liveness that well either, right? I mean, maybe there's some missing data, right? Is that because, it's just in transit or somebody's malicious? So it really is a sort of like specific errors of commission where you're saying, here's something really bad, okay, and, I'm proving that I did not do that kind of thing. And in particular, if we're talking about forks, right? So let me back up a little bit, right? So imagine you have a blockchain, okay? We put in zero knowledge proofs everywhere, and that's our goal. Okay, so everything has strong cryptographic guarantees that they're, it's verifiable. Okay, and it's great because these proofs can be succinct. You can verify it, users can verify it on a smartphone. They know that their transactions are processed correctly. They know the whole financial system is operating correctly, right? So fantastic verifiability guarantees, right? But even if you have that, okay, then, there may be a branch, right, on the blockchain where you have a fork, and both of those forks would just contain valid transaction. You could prove both of them, right, with a zero knowledge proof, right? So we're not getting rid of like other types of security guarantees we need, in particular economic security guarantees is, the way to reason about blockchains in the absence of forks. So that's something, a non-zero knowledge thing that I've been doing research on and looking into as well.
Yeah, so ZK, as you mentioned, doesn't really cover like beyond verifiability. There's some other aspects that may not be covered, especially confidentially within the liveness. But it's really great to see that you and the Nexus team are looking at different angles to help address it. So not just with verifiability, but with the economic security portion as well. But onto the subject for verifiability, I know that Nexus has a very big focus when it comes to verifiable AI, and you're specifically looking at creating these verification software pipelines. But very curious to hear about, in terms of verifiability and say some of the models that we're using today, what parts of the pipeline do you believe should be verified? So whether it be, say, the training part of the model or the inference part, or perhaps like the data itself, and especially in some, for example, high-stakes industries relating to healthcare or defense, especially in healthcare where perhaps the patient prefers that their data is not really revealed and kept private, or even with the like inputs of the model itself. Curious to hear when it comes to creating that ideal verification pipeline, what you see is most essential for being verified?
Yeah, okay. So let's see. I mean, so right now it's extremely expensive to create a zero-knowledge proofs, right? So the proving part of it is extremely expensive. So, taking a billion-dollar training run and then proving that in a CKVM, right? That's not the kind of thing that we're going to do. There's been some very interesting works and so like trying to work around that. So maybe we don't prove a training run and this is the model it results in, but rather we take the model and we prove that it's good according to some metric, right? That it doesn't have some laws with respect to some functions. So I think a lot of it will be sort of like workarounds where we sort of like try to narrow down more specifically what is it that we need to prove, right? And clearly high value industries is sort of like, so defense, medical things, and also finance, right? So we are sort of like interested in, but we're still figuring out what it means, like, what will be the impact on finance in the future, right? And what kind of things do we need to prove about, say, agents that do financial transactions and the type of permissions they have to act on behalf of users. But I think there's probably a lot of room for creative solutions, right? So one question I'm pondering about is, okay, so suppose you use AI, right? And it's brilliant at coming up with some solution that you didn't think about. But once you have the solution, often it's easier to reason why this is a good solution, right? So maybe we need to have AIs that sort of like are generative and discover things, and then simpler AIs that verify and check that things are correct, right? And maybe that's what we need to prove in the end. So I think there's a lot of room to sort of just figure out what is sort of like the specific verification cost as opposed to the cost of inferring or something with AI.
Yeah, definitely. The verification costs should definitely be kept into consideration, and depending on the use case as well, it's very important for people to decide what exactly you want to be proven, because it will differ from case-to-case scenarios. And just as a last question before we end today's session, I wanted to talk about just like the end game for ZK and how you see it coming. Right now, there's quite a lot of people on the community side, on the research side, on the developer side, all trying to advance ZK towards more mainstream adoption. So do you see ZK as being the end game, and especially for cases with scaling and privacy, or any other kinds of cryptographic protocols that you think are also promising? Just wanted to hear your thoughts on ZK as the end game.
Yeah. So I think there's a technical end game, and it really depends on how that pans out, which is the overhead for proving something, right? The further you can push that down, the more you can use zero-knowledge proofs everywhere. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. And the other thing I've been thinking about is what it takes to have adoption, very widely speaking, right? I mean, so right now, when I talk to people in blockchain space, they all know what zero-knowledge is, right? And that's a big transition from what it was before. If I talk to people outside the blockchain space, they have no clue what zero-knowledge proofs is, right? So there's still a large space for us to conquer. And I think some of the things that are needed, I think we're doing great on research, we're doing great on engineering, we're certainly starting to get traction with adoption and integration and so forth, right? But there are many other aspects to sort of like go beyond that and mature the industry. So one effort I've been involved in is the CK proof standardization effort, right? So basically the idea is let's create some standards for zero-knowledge proofs, because for a lot of people outside blockchain, when they're adopting something, they have to have like a good justification why this is a safe choice, right? They need to see the standard to say, okay, this is good, it has a standard, I can follow that standard, right? So like creating all these kind of social mechanisms and proves that this is a mature technology, I think that's part of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Those social mechanisms you mentioned are very important, in addition to, say, the education aspect. You mentioned, like, for example, there's still a lot of people in the blockchain space who may not be too familiar with what ZK is, let alone people who are just not involved in the crypto space in general. So it's very important to consider those social mechanisms, as you mentioned, and that makes me also think about the incentive alignment piece as well. So people really need to be aligned in terms of what sorts of advantages or what sorts of incentives that they can get from using ZK, and it should be something where using ZK is not too much of a headache or a barrier for them to use, as opposed to, say, like something where there's a lot of additional steps. Just for example, if we were to use ZK for privacy related, if there's additional steps just for using privacy, a lot of users wouldn't take it. So it should be something that is more of like a low barrier to entry, at least for the user side. Yeah. And yeah, definitely agree with all your points there. And thank you so much, Jens, for joining today. I really appreciate you for speaking about first the evolution of ZK, where we've came from and where you see us going, as well as your work in Nexus right now and looking at ZK in terms of the economic side, as well as the verifiability side. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you.